Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live. COVID cases across the country are continuing to fall as the vaccine rollout continues, but there's still questions about the longer-term approach to controlling the vaccine. Vaccine maker Moderna saying today that it has kicked off the submission process for full approval by the FDA. So let's talk a little bit more about this. We have Jesse Pelletier. He's a doctor who also co-founded Halodine. It's a company that makes antiseptic products. And Jesse, I want to kick off this conversation with that news from Moderna. Essentially, this is just formalizing the process. It's important to note the vaccine has already gone through most of the regulatory approvals required under that emergency authorization. This would allow them to kind of market the product. But what do you see as the important longer-term implications for these vaccines as we continue to think about maybe the need for booster shots X amount of months into the future?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on. One of the things I think about is, especially in the setting of vaccine hesitancy, is we too often paint with a very broad brush. We talk about distrust in the biomedical establishment. We might talk about party affiliation, things like this. But really, there are many individual reasons why people may choose to be vaccinated or not. And we understand these vaccinations are incredibly potent across all forms of variants and have really been key to reestablishing normalcy as a society and part of this, checkmating of the virus and beginning this post-COVID world in the United States. But I think that this is going to go a long way to those who are just slightly hesitant and need to have a little bit more of that full evaluation of the vaccines with respect to safety over the course of at least 6 months or beyond. And I think that's going to go a long way into having people feel much more comfortable about receiving more vaccines. And we could make some further headway into that 40% of the U.S. adult population that hasn't been vaccinated.
I'm curious to know if, in addition to that full FDA approval, if also the reopening might be doing something to help boost the desire for folks to go out and get a vaccine, especially as we now see that if you're vaccinated, you can essentially be maskless at the gym, at the restaurant, and so many people have been wanting to ditch those masks. And I think that now that we're officially in summer, now that we've just had this long weekend, so many folks would like to be out there maskless. I'm curious to know if you think holidays like the ones that we just had might go to sway folks into the vaccination camp.
Well, we did see some early data on this immediately after the announcement from the CDC on May 13th. We did see that there was an increase in the amount of people seeking vaccination. I think that's important. That was one of the reasons why the CDC kind of broke from their traditionally a very cautious strategy to one that was, allowing for a larger and open society is because of this. And so I think it's going to go a long way and it will be helpful. We do have an element of ensconcement and entrenchment of those who have not been vaccinated, though, because of some pushback on the internet, on social media, things like this. So we do have to be careful to continue to engender the conversation with these people as to why they should be vaccinated.
And Jesse, part of the reopening is kind of just people not knowing what the proper behaviors are for sanitation. Obviously, it's still advised that everyone tries to wash their hands and make sure that they keep clean. But you have a product, it's a nasal spray that can kind of help make sure that people are sanitized. How aggressively should people still be doing those things, using your products as some of these mask mandates go away and people start to pretend like everything was the way it was before the pandemic?
Yeah, that's really astute. Thank you for asking that question. At Halodine, one of the things that we realized early on was that this is a respiratory virus. So it's important to follow the measures of the CDC, the mask, the social distancing, the ventilation. But because it's a respiratory virus, really the virus initially infects, it replicates, and it spreads in every case from the nose and the mouth. So you can use these different layers of protection that the CDC has, but you can also use a therapeutic like Halodine to kill the virus in the nose and the mouth. And it would act in an outbound and inbound fashion so that if you were infected and you were asymptomatic, as many people are, you might produce fewer aerosols and droplets that enter, fewer virus particles that enter those aerosols and droplets, so you'd be less transmissible. It's not a cure, but it's certainly an extra layer of protection. And if you were uninfected, really it would serve as a means of chemical protection so that if you received the virus, you could thwart infection before it establishes on the surfaces of the nose and the mouth. So we really see Halodine as a means of extra protection during this pandemic.
Curious to know if there's any learnings that you guys at Halodine have seen from the pandemic, at least in terms of this nasal spray that might signal potential other applications for use.
Yeah, again, a great question. So we know that our active pharmaceutical ingredient, povidone iodine, is a broad spectrum antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. It has excellent efficacy against SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. We've had papers published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of Prosthodontics. There have been numerous clinical trials that are extremely supportive in nature. But we also understand that povidone iodine is extremely effective against other respiratory type viruses and other respiratory type bacteria like influenza, like RSV, things of this nature. So the whole idea, it's almost like a new product category or teaching a new behavior that we might cleanse our nose or our mouth, similar to how we might wash our hands before we put on our gloves. We might do this before we put on our masks. And I just think that the world of infection control is going to change as there's going to be a lot more knowledge and science around the ascendancy of seasonal viruses moving forward in the post-pandemic world.